Prime Minister Theresa May on Friday delivers a speech in Florence, Italy to stress her vision on UK-EU partnership post-Brexit. With the fourth round of Brexit talks beginning next Monday, will the two sides make any progress on key issues? And Russian President Vladimir Putin has instructed her government to make the ruble the currency of payment at all Russian seaports by next year. Does it have anything to do with rising tensions between the US and Russia? Welcome to The Point. Live from Beijing, I'm Li Xin. 700 years ago, the Italian city of Florence rose to prominence as one of the places where the Renaissance took off, and its economy used to thrive because of both its trade and financial industry. On Friday, the UK's Prime Minister Theresa May chose the same city to deliver her make-or-break speech, with ambitions to underline Britain's hopes for a special partnership with the European Union post-Brexit. Next week, the fourth round of Brexit negotiations will begin on September the 25th. But the EU's chief Brexit negotiator, Michel Barnier, issued a fresh warning that Britain must settle the accounts and speed up the pace of negotiations if it wants a free trade deal when it leaves the bloc. While Theresa May has frequently said she is hoping to secure a deal that is good for both the UK and the EU, she has also not ruled out leaving the bloc without one. With the clock now ticking for the UK to leave the EU in March 2019, can the two sides break the deadlock in the fourth round of divorce talks? Joining me for the discussion are Professor Tom Brooks, Professor of Law and Government at Durham University, and Cui Hongjian, Director of the European Department at the China Institute of International Studies. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Professor Cui, why does Theresa May chose the city of Florence to deliver her much anticipated speech? Is there something special about that city?
Yes, I think there should be very, special meaning for this place of Florence as a place for Prime Minister May to have her speech, very important speech, as we know, regarding to how this direction of Brexit in future. Because as we know, in history, there is a long, tradition between Florence and the UK for commerce and trade, when Florence was used to be a very important commercial and trade center in Europe. And as we know now, because from UK side, Madam May's government want to have a kind of transitional period for Brexit, which means that still in another 2 years, Britain want to have a kind of a special trade and economic arrangement with the European Union. So I think that Florence shows a very, special willingness from UK side to try to keep close economic and trade relations with the European Union.
Professor Brooks, what is your take of the significance of Theresa May's speech and her choice of the venue?
Oh, great to be back with you. I think that that's right, that the British perspective has certainly been about thinking about trade and money as the key thing that it wants to see Brexit deliver for Britain, and that's how it largely sees its connection with the rest of Europe. Britain's big problem is that the rest of Europe doesn't see it that way. Florence, of course, not only a heart of trade, but also a heart of culture. And I think that in the European Union, there's a strong sense of having shared values and identity that trumps views on money. I think maybe Theresa May's secret reason for choosing Florence is, of course, Florence was the home of Niccolo Machiavelli, the author of The Prince, this very cruel, calculating type, characterized political theorist. And maybe she's trying some tricks up her sleeve, borrowed from that great Florence master's work.
Okay, so what do you think she has in her mind? I mean, basically, to have that way is you know, in order to achieve your goal, you can kind of do whatever you want, right? Professor Cui, what is your take of this possible underlying reason to Theresa May's choice of the city?
Yeah, I think that now, if we look at this debates between so-called soft Brexit and the hard Brexit, I think a very main divergences between them is how would be these relations in future between Britain and the European Union. So I think now, at this moment, Prime Minister May chose Florence as a place for her speech. It shows a very, I mean, a kind of message, maybe a positive message to people who want to have a more, flexible relations with the European Union in future. Mm-hmm. But of course, I think at the same time, and at this moment, Prime Minister May because she will have this speech to the European leaders, not to the European Union, especially to the Commission. I think it shows another very important message that UK and also Prime Minister May, they want to have some more influence on the member states of the European Union and try to, win a kind of advantageous position in the future, negotiation. And of course, they try to maybe avoid, to some degree, pressure from the European Union, institutions. I think it's also kind of a tactical of a negotiation from the UK side.
Yeah, Professor Brooks, talking of money, a government source said that now Britain is willing to pay 20 billion euros or 20 billion pounds to the EU during the transition period, but only if the UK has access to the single market and some form of customs union, which would allow the UK to strike its own trade deals during the transition period. Here's the question. Is that true, that this is something she might pronounce at this moment? And secondly, if you have to pay 20 billion euros to stay in the single market, some people are saying, why are you set to leave it in the first place?
Well, yeah, that's right. So some critics of this thought that Britain should pay anything say, well, European Union's a club, we're leaving it, why should we owe them any further membership dues if we're not using the club? I think it is pretty, who knows what she's going to say, but I think it's very likely that she will make some announcement about money, and I think 20 billion pounds is probably not too far off what she might say, and whatever that number is, it'll be a lot lower than I think the European Union has been expecting Britain would pay up, because of course Britain, as a member of the European Union for 4 decades, has agreed a variety of programs and proposals in the European Union and staffing and buildings and costs and real estate that go on for many years beyond our leaving. And so in a sense, the thought is that Britain is a party to agreements that go much beyond the transition period, and so should pay some of that cost of the decisions that it supported along the way. I think the other side of this is Britain will want to pay this money during the transition period with access to the single market, while Britain, during that time, is trying to do deals with other countries. And I think that that is going to be a real problem, because the European Union will not want non-members who have not paid the rest of the European Union any money, don't have a deal with the European Union, to be having access to the single market via the United Kingdom as the UK tries to get its other deals in place. The European Union has a very strong hand here, and I think it will be continuing to play it, and play it very well. They are calling all the shots.
Yeah, again, last Friday, UK Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson published a 4,200 words article in the Telegraph to set out his vision for post-Brexit Britain, arguing that Britain should not have to pay for access for the single market. What do you think is the intention of him by setting out his vision on this matter at this moment?
Well, I think that what he's doing there is, according to various reports, he's been stung by accusations of being a liar about his claim on the side of his tour bus that there'd be £350 million per week going into the NHS or other public services, money that Britain does not pay into the European Union, even according to the official statistician of the government. And also that the government has said that it will not be investing in the NHS even if it could find it somewhere else that has other priorities. So he's really been stung that he made a number of promises to voters, winning the referendum vote in favor of Brexit, that the government that he is a part of and a senior member of, Secretary of State for, has said that it will not deliver on. So I think that it was his effort to try to push the Prime Minister more into his direction. I think on the one hand it shows that, that the fact he's still in office has shown how weak the Prime Minister is, that she doesn't feel that she can, she's too weak to sack him from her government, that she has so few people to rely on in her minority government. On the other side, it'll be interesting to see if her plans are much different from his. I suspect that they will be. And if they are very different, it makes you wonder just how much longer this government can continue doing these Brexit negotiations when they haven't figured out as a government what they really want Brexit to mean.
Yeah. Professor Cui, what is your take on this, the problems that this article might have singled out?
As we know, it shows now a very difficult situation for Theresa May and her government. As we know, it shows that she has to, fight on the same time on two sides. I mean, externally and internally. As we know, firstly, she has to, deal with this, competition from Boris Johnson or some other political figures within Conservative Party. As we know, because from this article, we can find everything when Mr. Boris Johnson, lead this Brexit referendum, and even now he tried to, call for the UK people to support a kind of very, very hard Brexit line. But of course, I think it's out of the interest of UK government. But of course, at the same time, I think that another difficult issue now for Prime Minister May is how could she try to, keep, I think, a safe distance with Mr. Boris Johnson. Because so far as we know, Boris Johnson already threatened that he will, resign once there are some, too soft Brexit line from Prime Minister May. So I think that's also the reason why we are waiting for this very important speech from Prime Minister, because we want to know which kind of tone she will choose, and to firstly calm down her party, and then to give some more positive message to European Union side. If so, this negotiation would be, go forward. Otherwise, I think this deadlock will keep going on.
Yeah, Professor Brooks, very briefly, given the time we have, the limited time we have until the deadline of March 2019, how big is the chance that the two sides can come to some kind of agreement?
It's not beyond the realm of all possibility. I think that so much is at stake, certainly on the UK side, and I think the UK has a lot more to lose than the European Union does, although the European Union has a lot to lose as well. I think that there is a possibility that something might happen. All that said, the original timetable was that there would be some principles agreed more or less in about a year or so into the negotiations, because we were then going to wait at least 8 months, it was expected, or longer, for the national governments of the European Union and the Commission and others to come to its own view as to whether or not they accepted the principles for this divorce, because all would have to agree it if the deal was to be a deal at all. And so, it's not like they've got until March 2019 to agree some principles between themselves. They've got to get this agreement done,
much earlier.
Have some agreement between the two negotiators fast before it goes to the votes. And I think it's becoming increasingly unlikely.
Okay, thank you very much. We have to go. Tom Brooks, Professor of Law and Government at Durham University, and Cui Hongjian, Director of the European Department at the China Institute of International Studies. You're watching The Point with me, Liu Xin. We'll take a short break and we'll be back right after this. Russian President Vladimir Putin has instructed his government to make the ruble the currency of payment at all Russian seaports by next year. The switch in port tariffs to rubles was first proposed by the president a year and a half ago. However, big transport companies contested the order before the courts because they would like to keep revenues in dollars and other more stable foreign currencies. Does Putin's latest order have anything to do with rising tensions between the US and Russia? And coupled with Venezuela's recent decision to price oil in the Chinese renminbi yuan, how is the dollar dominance in world trade being further challenged? Joining me from Washington, D.C. is Professor Christopher Chambers from Georgetown University. And on the line from Moscow, we have Pavel Felgenhauer, who's a Russian military analyst. Welcome to both of you. Mr. Felgenhauer, let me come to you first. Explain a little bit the significance of this announcement. And also, we actually haven't seen too much reporting on this news. How credible is this story?
Well, the story is, of course, credible, and there's been an official decision by the president that there should be a transition on by the 1st of January next year, though, of course, it's going to be not that clear-cut. There's going to be a special transition periods in some cases, and maybe also the measure could be weakened by special exchange rates and allowing some of the port authorities to actually use some kind of equivalent of a dollar, virtual equivalent of a dollar for figuring out their tariffs. This has been a long, actually, turf battle inside Russia about the tariffs. For the anti-monopoly authority was after several Russian ports, in particular the Novorossiysk port, which has been one of the most staunch resisting this measure. The monopoly authority said that since the dollar tariffs didn't change since 15 in Russia, but since the ruble has fallen significantly, the prices for companies using the ports have risen, and expenses. But the Novorossiysk port is actually the main stockholder is Transneft. It's a very powerful state monopoly that owns all Russian oil pipelines. But Russia and the main goods that are being in Novorossiysk exported, it's oil.
Yeah.
So powerful oil companies like Rosneft, which is also a state-owned monopoly in oil, have been complaining. So it's two state monopolies kind of fighting each other, and the Kremlin serving as some kind of arbiter between them.
Yeah. So how do you look at the possibility of this measure, of this this decision finally being approved into legislation? Because we know Putin had raised it a year and a half ago, but it didn't really come through by then, and now he's trying to pick it up again. What's the chances of this being approved this time?
Well, I mean, officially it's kind of it has been approved that the Russian economy should be de-dollarized, that everyone should use the ruble, but Novorossiysk does not want to because the ruble-dollar exchange rate is volatile, and they say that investment in new ports is going to be affected if there's going to be only ruble. So there's going to be some kind of compromise, because on both sides of the argument, there are very important, very powerful monopolies led by people who are Putin's friends, who have opposing views on this.
Yeah.
As in many other cases, Russia is a kind of country where powerful state monopolies fight for position and money, and the Kremlin, Putin, is an arbiter in their confrontation.
What do you think are the most important reasons behind Putin's decision to replace the US dollar with ruble in these matters?
Well, I think this is mostly de-dollarization. It kind of sounds very ideologically sound in the current climate, especially of very bad Russian-American relations. So that most likely was used to lobby Putin. But this is, this is not really the main issue here. The main issue here is the confrontations, turf wars between state monopolies and very powerful people in the surroundings of Mr. Putin. And it's not really foreign policy really ignited. It's just about money.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Pavel Felgenhauer, joining us from Moscow. And let me bring in my guest, Mr. Professor Chambers from Georgetown University. It's good to have you on the show again. So you also listened to Mr. Felgenhauer's explanation on the phone. From the Washington perspective, how is this piece of news being taken on that side of the world?
Well, it's being taken very seriously in many circles. I mean, in our university, at our business school. But generally, given the political climate internally in Washington, it's something that is basically an absent issue, and it should be front and center because you do have this intersection in Russia between domestic politics and the domestic economy and international relations. And I think Mr. Putin is trying to put all that together to improve his economy, to kind of break up what might be an axis between the United States and Saudi Arabia over petrodollars, but also make a statement that Russia has come a long way and is a world power and is a world economic power and wants to have, you know, a Eurasian sphere of influence economically and politically. So there's a lot of things going on. The problem is that over here in Washington, there are also a lot of things going on politically, and this has really been pushed to the back burner, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, Putin's proposal comes after the U.S. government approved new sanctions against Russia in August. And Russian Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev also said the sanctions showed a full-fledged trade war had been declared against Russia. So do you think, so is this proposal being taken as part of the trade war here, or is it seen more in economic terms to provide support for the ruble, or as what the Russian expert pointed out just now, you know, only the Russian government being an arbitrator between two state monopolies?
As to what your guest had talked about with respect to internal domestic Russian politics and the economy and trade kind of turf wars and a trade war between the United States and Russia, really the only discussion there on those levels is among experts here in the United States. Among the political class in the White House and those in Congress, it's all about relationships with Russia and whether the White House can appear to be tough with Russia and make things sting with Russia, because, you know, we have an ongoing investigation here about collusion and about certain high-level people in the Trump campaign and the administration who have been accused of basically being in Mr. Putin's pocket. So there is a lot going on here. Unfortunately, the political class, the political establishment, has not caught up with the discussions that the business and economic people are having. And this is a big deal here because you're talking about 60, 70 years of petrodollar dominance being threatened by what Mr. Putin is doing, whether his intentions are to deal with a domestic economic and interest group issue, or he wants to stick it to the United States. It really doesn't matter. Is that we are not paying as much attention to this as we need to be over here in Washington.
But after all, we're looking at the dominance of the U.S. dollar since the end of the Second World War. I mean, that is a very strong position, and for one country, for Russia, to try to, you know, push through this legislation. How do you think the dominance of the U.S. is likely to be challenged by this move?
I don't think it's going to be challenged. I mean, because, you know, the petrodollar relationship that really kind of took what happened post-World War II and basically expanded it, you know, blew it up during the oil crisis in the 70s, is still a bedrock form of trade currency. The problem is that Russia unilaterally is not going to make any difference. Unless Russia can ally itself somehow with China, as you see in some of these Silk Road initiatives, it's really not going to make much of a splash.
Yeah,
the Chinese are really the players here.
At this moment, we're looking at
Russia unilaterally.
Sure, but we are also looking at other countries making similar moves. For instance, Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro announced that his country is pricing oil in renminbi yuan. Do you see a connection there? Do you see a tendency of really the dominance of the U.S. dollar being challenged and being gradually eroded by the economic power that are represented by BRICS countries?
Yeah, I think that it's going to be, it does represent a threat, but again, what Venezuela is doing, I mean, these are very, very situation-specific very isolated kinds of movements, unless we see a number of countries doing this across the board and being very vocal about it, and China really kind of puts its weight to it, I don't see any immediate threat to the present kind of petrodollar regime. And perhaps that's why the political class here, and thus the press, is not paying as much attention to it. I think that when the dam kind of breaks, then you'll see the reaction. But right now, I think people are too distracted over here with other political fights, and you know, it's going to take something beyond what's going on in Venezuela and what President Putin is doing with his seaports. And again, you heard your guest say that issue isn't even resolved yet. So we'll see what happens. I mean, if the dam breaks on the dollar, you will see the administration and the press here jumping all over it. Sadly, they are just not focused on it now here, and
but
we
you know,
need to
a dam never breaks overnight. There are small cracks.
Right. Well, they're cracks. Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah. Okay, we have to go. Many thanks, Professor Christopher Chambers from Georgetown University. And here is my last point. However, we have discussed with our guests that this is how I look at it. The unraveling of the US dollar dominance is a matter of time. Combined, the economies of BRICS countries account for almost a quarter of the world's GDP. Our growth accounts for over half of the world's economic growth. The Washington Consensus, established since the end of World War II, no longer serves adequately the need of the great majority of the world's population, which are living in developing countries. The establishment of a BRICS New Development Bank in 2014 was seen as the starting point for the unraveling of the dollar hegemony. Now, when the U.S. abuses the dominance of the greenback and wields sanctions on countries which dare to stand up to them, it would only quicken the pace of the dollar's decline. The process will not happen overnight, but given the vitality and unity of emerging economies, that trend is set to steadily pick up pace. That's all for this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. As always, follow me on Twitter or Facebook using the handle The Point with LX, and download the application called CGTN Live to watch our show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Thanks for watching. You've got The Point.